everyone, and thanks for joining us again for the final in our series of pre-Palmer chats. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by three titans of the sport, David Luckman, Glyn Barnett and Parag Patel. Hello, gents. Thank you so much.
Hello, Dan.
Thanks so much for joining me. I think we've got quite a lot of ground to cover, so this might go on a little bit, but I really want to kind of pick your brains and try and make this as helpful as possible for as many people as possible. So David, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. And if you could talk to us a little bit about how you've been preparing for this World Championship and whether or not you're doing anything differently to how you prepared for Trentham 5 years ago.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working on my physical fitness, making sure I'm fit enough to cope with the fact that we're going to be at altitude and it's a long event. Been focusing more this time on my postural strength so that I won't get sore in my neck or shoulders during the shooting. Mental side, been doing a lot of visualization, mental rehearsal, so that I'm mentally equipped to cope with whatever might happen and whatever might come. And more recently, I've been dry firing to try and get a good rhythm, into my shooting, so I'll be able to perform in the way that I want to perform when I get out there. This is what I would normally try and do, but it's been quite different to the approach from 5 years ago. The key thing that happened in the lead up to the Palmer 5 years ago was back in July in 2018, I won the Queen's. And that was the last thing on my list. At that point, I had won everything that I ever wanted to win. And the keenness and the hunger went away. So in the lead up to the Palmer in January, I kept my physical fitness there, but I had no ability to engage with any of the mental side of it or any of the technical lying down shooting practicing. So I was kind of relying on the world. Well, I knew it would come back, but I was kind of relying on that world of I've got best part of 3 weeks of the Palmer. I'm going to be with the guys again. It'll come, and it did. But yeah, this time I've been able to prepare properly as I would like to.
And in terms of the visualization, is there anything specific to Bloemfontein that you're working on with your visualization?
Not particularly. It's more of match situation, what's going on around me. It's not, the visualization isn't specific to a particular range or condition.
Glyn, obviously you're out in Abu Dhabi. Does that present any kind of issues in terms of not being able to get down to obviously to a rifle range as maybe as often as you would like? In terms of has that had any kind of impact on your prep?
Inevitably. So I've been here, I guess, nearly 2.5, 3 years now, I suppose. And it had an effect not only on my selection process, certainly internally anyway. I felt during the selection process, I found it slightly more difficult, I guess, personally. I mean, I've not shot a Palmer since 2003, so trying to get back into the saddle for this sort of thing has been quite a challenge, and it's been compounded by the logistics of living, 7.5-hour flight away. And so I've been very conscious of a number of things. The first thing is that I don't shoot as often as the other two guys do. I just can't. I don't have and mind you, I never really have done. And so my preparation has had to be much more mental and physical, and talking of visualization, I go through shot routines, physically trying to keep, as fit as I can, not just because it's South Africa, but also I know that improves my shooting. But in terms of the selection as well, so my prep for selection has had to be really, really careful. And I've found myself being quite critical of myself if I've had a bad day or if I've had a bad shoot, because I know that I'm being scrutinized obviously by the management team in the selection process, but also by others around me who have probably done a lot more shooting, are are desperate to get into the team. I rock up, I fire, 70, 80 shots on a training weekend, and some of them don't quite go so well. And so I've taken that quite, I've had to be very careful about how I sort of, coach myself to try and sort of overcome some of the perhaps poorer performances that I've had. So certainly in the last, year and a half, when we've been able to shoot, I've been able to make most of the training weekends. So, add in a bit of jet lag as well. And the performance has been okay, but for me, it's been much more mental and much more physical in terms of the preparation for this. And, again, as David said, we're going to be at altitude at South Africa, and certainly, I don't think we were surprised, but I think we were reminded of how difficult Bloemfontein can be physically last year when we went, and how important fatigue and physical fitness is. So I think that's kind of been at the top of the list. And within that has been my mental rehearsal, certainly, because physically getting behind the gun for me has been significantly more tricky than perhaps the other two guys, and certainly other people on the team.
And do you feel, I shoot incredibly infrequently. Do you feel when you for a period out, does it take you a little bit of a while to get the feel back when you are behind the rifle, or does that kind of come fairly easily?
I think that we may move on to this later in the talk anyway, but I'm very particular with my process. I'm very particular with my routine, and that's been the same for quite a long time now. So certainly, it always kind of surprises me, but that routine and that process always come back, and the muscle memory is there, and it always has been, and it has been for quite a long time. It's the finer motor skills, it's the finer skills that need tuning, when you've not shot for a little while, certainly from my point of view. My bad shots go low right, and I'm sure it's triggering, and so it's those sorts of things I have to constantly work on, particularly having not been behind a gun for a period of time. And in fact, it's something I always work on. So the gross motor skills are there, the muscle memory is there, the process is there, the rhythm is there, but I have to work just that little bit harder at making sure that the hold is good and the triggering is good. It does come, but it takes time. So I suspect that my SA championships might be a bit rusty.
Well, we will see in a couple of weeks. Parag, I know I've spoken to you in the past, definitely after you won your fifth grand a couple of years ago, and you've been huge on the importance of physical fitness for a while now. Can you talk a little bit about what specific kind of physical prep you've been doing, and why you came to regard it as so important? I don't know whether you long held that view, but there does seem to have been a real kind of emphasis on it in the last few years. So I'm interested in your kind of specific preparation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think before I answer that question, this Palmer's been a long time coming, and if I were to look back from the last Palmer, the year before that, 2018, I didn't, for my standards, have a great Bisley meeting. And I then looked back at all my years prior to that, and I had moments of excellence, but generally the consistency had been dropping. And at that point, I changed my shooting jacket, and I think certainly that made a big difference to consistency for me. And then the pandemic kicked in, and during the pandemic, I just found I had much more time because a lot of the distractions went away. So it was just NHS practice. I had a lot more time to do physical exercise because I could cycle to work, and that's what I did a lot of. And just not knowingly, my fitness got better just because I was cycling more, and my shooting got better probably because I was physically fitter and technically holding the rifle stiller with the new jacket. And I think what I tend to do is I tend to look at an event and work out what I need to do to train back from that. So certainly I'm very pleased with the way that my shooting jacket's going. It's no longer a new jacket, but still holding me well. And so I've just been working very hard on the physical aspects for this trip. South Africa, I've been there many times, and I'm always surprised by the end of the last week. I'm pretty exhausted. I'm often mentally exhausted, but mainly physically. Things start to ache a bit more. It's early mornings, late finishes in the heat. And so I've definitely put a lot more emphasis in the physical aspects for training. And actually, to be honest, I really enjoy it. The more and more I do, I've done some heart rate monitoring and shooting, and the results are very interesting because in competition, I put my heart rate monitor on in Bisley shoots, and my resting heart rate is 52, 53. It'll go up to 115, 120, up to 130, just around firing a shot. Then it goes back down again. So I just feel that there's got to be physical aspects to your conditioning that are so important, particularly in grueling conditions like we will in South Africa. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. It leads kind of nicely into, I want to talk next a little bit about daily protocols. And you mentioned there that you've toured South Africa many times, and are always surprised at how tired you feel at the end of, the championships. Obviously, with this, you don't just finish the championships. That's almost the warm-up, as well as being obviously an incredibly prestigious competition in its own right. How are you preparing to deal with, getting a good base in during some of the warm-up shoots, but knowing that the most important shoot, being the Palmer, will come right at the very end of what will be a very long, arduous tour, as you say, very hot and very long days on the range at 7, not leaving for another 10, 11 hours before you get back to the hotel in the evening. So how are you planning to ensure that you peak at the right time?
Okay, so I think if you look back to 2014 in Glasgow, I think it was 2014, yeah. David and I did the Bisley meeting, and we didn't do all of it, so we did half of it, and the focus really was on training for the Commonwealth Games, which was immediately after. And I don't think all teams did that, but we certainly cut short our meeting. So the focus wasn't really on trying to do well at the grand aggregate at Bisley. It was about just trying to get ourselves conditioned. And I think, without being disrespectful to the South African Open, because it's a very difficult competition, I will be using the whole of the South African Open to test, to trial, to make sure my kit's working, check both rifles. And for me, if I feel that I'm getting tired, I might take a day off. Knowing that puts me out of contention. But you're right, I want to be in peak form day 2 of the World Championships for the Palmer team match, and that's the last shooting day. Super interesting, especially in terms of the just taking a day off if you need to. David, what does a day at the range look like for you, in terms of what time you wake up? Will you eat a breakfast? What do you do at the range? What will you do in between shoots? How do you manage the daily rhythms and stresses of strains of trying to when you go back to the hotel, what time will you go to bed? Will you have a drink with dinner? All of that sort of thing. So what does a day look like for you?
So the first thing that's really important, I want to protect my sleep. So I get up relatively late for the time I'm going to leave. It's not so I'm rushed, but I need to be efficient with everything that I'm going to do. I will have breakfast at the hotel, putting my lenses in, etc. It's all quite planned into a fairly tight timeline to help protect my sleep. Then on the range, warm-up's really important. Make sure all the muscles are loose for the shooting, because that will again help with the fatigue. But then otherwise at the range, I'm trying to keep it really low maintenance. I'll be chilling out as much as possible. I'll be keeping out of the sun. It's slightly different approach to Parag. I won't be looking to take a rest day, but I'll be trying to make my shooting ahead of the World Championships really low effort. So trying to build that nice free flowing rhythm, so I'm not over concentrating and trying really hard and exerting a lot of energy towards it. Coming back to the hotel, I will be trying to fit in some good long stretching sessions. Ideally every day. Don't know if that will happen, but that's what I'll look for. With regard, I'll try and go to bed at a sensible time every night. With regard to drinking, as you said, World Championship weeks, Commonwealth Games, haven't drunk in those forever. Before that, I'll want to make sure that I'm doing the sensible thing, and it needs to be moderation. It needs to be something that doesn't impact on the sleep that I'm going to get that night.
And how many hours of sleep are you generally looking at? 8?
8, to be honest, 8 or 9 if I can. Because the shooting, even if you're trying to do it in a free-flowing, low effort way, still does take it out of you, and you need to sleep a little bit more.
Glyn, anything different from your perspective? Obviously, having not had the opportunity of as much shooting.
So my approach will be very similar to Parag's. There's two sides. That number one is the sort of the run up to the Worlds, and certainly I will have to use the SA Championships, as I'm sure other people will as well, as an opportunity to get used to the range, get reused to the range, to make sure your kit is working well. Learning tricks of the weather, learning I guess from taking a leaf out of David's book, how long does it actually take to get from A range to D range, and because the turnarounds are often so quick. Trying to make, as David says, each day sort of low maintenance. Certainly, my aim or the finish of my tour is the final shot in the Palmer match, and personally, I'm there to be part of the Palmer team, and to help Great Britain, perform at their best, in the Palmer match. And as Parag says, if I'm getting tired, I'm going to need to find a way to sort of take some time out, and whether that be a scheduled half day or whatever, then so we just have to go with it. The other thing as well, which I've experienced a few times in my shooting career, and others may have done, I'm sure these guys, I know these guys have, is that it also adds an extra mental sort of, I don't know, it's a really weird mental thing to go through a championships and you shoot, let's say, a Queen's final, or you shoot the South African final, and that's finished, and then you have to do it again the next day, but in something different. And you have to then, you sort of peak at a final, you then sort of have this sort of mental drop off and a sort of perhaps a mental sigh of relief to then have to come back and then compete in the World Individuals, to then have to do it again for the Palmer match. So I think that sort of, it's a bit like, for the teams that, that did the O2 games at Bisley, you do the Queen's final. I happen to do very well in that Queen's final, which then, and then you have to have a complete mental reset to then come back and do it again, after the Queen's. And it's the most bizarre feeling doing the Palmer in 03 after the Bisley meeting, the most bizarre feeling. And that I find quite difficult. It's almost a palpable feeling I have. And that will be my, that will be something I'm going to have to work on. In terms of the average day on the range, less is more, protected sleep. I'd rather get up early and have a relaxed morning and go to bed a little bit early rather than rushing in the morning, as but trying to keep process going during the day as well, but resting, keeping out the sun, etc. So I think there's lots of different elements to it, which kind of works a little bit from both of these guys, but with the added mental side of this, having to pick yourself back up again and get back onto the range and do it all again at a different level, again and again.
And I suppose that's that it'll be literally just that one practice day in between, as you say, potentially shooting in a World Championship final, and then having to get yourself up again for 700 meters on day one. That's interesting. You said before, Glyn, about your bad shots, and they tend to go low right. What does a bad shoot? I mean, we talk. You guys obviously have had tremendous shoots, and that's the kind of norm. But what does a bad shoot look and feel like to you? And when those shots go low right, how do you cope with that? Do you just ignore it, put it out of your mind, and focus on the next one? Talk to us a little bit about that.
You have a little talk to yourself. I see a low right shot come up, and I sort of course it's gone low right, because that's where I put it. And I try and figure out if it's anything I've done that has caused it to go low right. Typically, it will be something to do with my right hand. I recognise it as something I've done, and I have to sort of reconcentrate the mind to make sure that my right hand position and my triggering is as good as it should be. I think the recognised bad shots are, easier to sort of park, if you like, and so right, done it again, move on. That's frustrating. We'll crack on. The worst shoot is when you don't understand what's going on. Not necessarily left and right, because we all have days when you put 5 right on and actually you needed 3, and you put 3 right on and actually you needed 5. We all have days like that. But if you have a shoot where things are up and down and left and right and in corners and stuff like that, and you just don't get it, that to me is quite frustrating. And if I have a shoot like that, and I've certainly had a few. I take it all back to basics. Right, okay, let's just ignore the wind. We'll get it as good as we can. Let's just let off some good shots, and let's just concentrate on trying to get the graph, get the elevation back down again. I don't understand what's going on. Is it me? Is it the kit? But trying at the same time to sort of stay focused on the task in hand, and actually just one shot at a time. Relax the left arm, right hand position. Make sure the hold is good. Wind is going to be close enough. Right, just let off a good shot and hopefully pull things back a little bit. But so to me, a bad shoot is a frustrating. I don't understand what's going on. Bad shots, we will fire them. If you know where they go, fantastic. And if you can see them go, even better. But you live, you learn, and you move on.
David, I have a specific shoot in mind with you, and I'm sorry if this blindsides you. But I remember, I was your check scorer in New Zealand for the Worlds, and I remember, I think maybe it was day 2 at 800 yards, and everything, as Glyn says, you put on 3, you needed 5, you put on 5, you needed 3, and for I think it was a period of 5 or 6 shots early on in the shoot where everything you seemed to do seemed to make things worse. It would go left, then it would go right, then it would go left, then it might go high, then it would go, and then I remember you stopping, and you finished, and you didn't miss after that. It was, you hammered the V-ball, but by that point, the damage had been done. I'm sure you remember the shoot that I'm talking about.
I do now. I had wiped it from my memory, but now you mention it again. Gosh, you lost a bit with that. Traumatic.
So I guess what I'm asking is, if you do remember it, and sorry for dragging it up from the depths, from the well of your back of your mind, but can you remember what specifically you did to kind of get things back on track? As Glyn says, you take it back to basics and just make sure that let's just make this as good as it can be, or.
So, in my head, that was a bad score. It wasn't necessarily a bad shoot. So, bad shoots are about poor performance for me, rather than the poor score. And what was going on there is I was repeatedly getting it wrong. The wind looked right to me up via the shot, and I was getting it wrong. So it wasn't so much. Something that was wrong with my performance. It was more my winkles, and putting it down gave me a chance to break and reset how I was viewing the wind. If I do have something that fits in my mind as more of a bad shoot, and again, saying it's performance, a bad shoot could score 45, a bad shoot can still score 50. It's that kind of feeling of instability. It's the extra junk that's going through your head. It's I didn't quite do that right. It's all the nonsense that shouldn't be there. And to recover from that, it overlaps a lot with what Glyn was saying. It's bringing back in that little bit of consciousness to focus on a few fundamentals, but only a few fundamentals that are particularly important to me. And if you just concentrate on relaxing my front arm, make sure I'm looking through the middle of the sights, which again, really simple, but it's something that I forget to do at times. Follow through, just to focus on a few simple things, and that normally brings the sheep back to where it should be.
So very much a kind of back to basics. Parag, is there anything there that you disagree with, or that you have any further kind of enlightening tidbits?
Well, in Trentham, I had many more bad shoots than David did. I would say I tend to find that, you know, with my performances, is a bit of a bell curve. So if I have bad shots in a meeting, it will be at the beginning, and I tend to get better and better and better, and they become fewer and fewer. And I'm sure it's just the fact that I need a certain amount of gun time, certain amount of ammo time, just to get consistency. And then there's a point at which where I think I tail off, and then I start making mistakes just because I'm fatigued. So, and I lean on my mates. So, you know, regularly I'll show my plots to Glyn or David, and I'll just say, you know, which rifle should I use? What's going wrong here? What do you think? And I think that's really important, because, you know, sometimes you're just not particularly objective, and you need somebody else just for advice, as a sounding board.
In terms of seeing things that you can't see, that's super interesting. Talk to us a little bit, Parag, if you can, about, and this kind of goes to how you prepare for a shoot as well, I suppose, in terms of what people call the zone, and anything that you do to try and find that elusive flow state where, you know, everything just seems to be happening, you know, not necessarily easily, but naturally.
Oh, you cut out, but I think I'll answer the question based on what you first said. I think for me, I get into the zone, the more confidence I build in my hold and my shot formation. So again, it's that bell curve. So as I get into a meeting and the shots have gone down the range more and more and more, I can see that my performance improves, and there are less bad shots. Now, my bad shots don't go low right; they go in all over the place. So there's no real consistency to it, but it certainly does reduce. And initially, I'm very conscious in what I'm doing. So triggering, head position, particularly for me. And then when it really matters, I just forget it all, and I just go, well, there's nothing more I can do now. I can't train anymore now. I'm just going to let it flow. And that's the point at which where, you know, it's like driving a car, isn't it? You get to work and you've forgotten how you've done it. You just can't think about it in the most important competitions. You just got to let it happen and trust your training. And that's sort of stood me in good stead.
Glyn, anything that you try to focus on in particular to try and get yourself in that state?
If I go back literally a century, when I was younger, getting into the zone to me felt like an active thing, and there'd be, music behind the firing point, and trying to keep quiet, and then sort of concentrating on the firing point, and coming off the firing point and still be concentrating. It was actually quite tiring. I think now, however, it's not a conscious thing. It's not an active process for me. It's more about, I think, for me anyway, it's about being aware of what I can control. It's being able to ignore and cut out superfluous stuff that's going on around me. Somebody next door is arguing with a range officer, or somebody next door is stamping their feet, or there's chatter behind a firing point. Being able to unconsciously cut that out. I use my process on the firing point is very particular. My ergonomics on the firing point are very particular as well. So less movement. It's very efficient. Or at least I think it is. I noticed on the Facebook thing, Charles says I always do a wind graph, And he's right. I do more often than not do a wind graph the correct way round. That's not necessarily so I can judge the wind or whatever. I see trends and stuff. It's to keep me busy. It's to take my mind off other stuff. It's to allow me to plot my shot, plot my elevation, calculate the correct wind, plot it. And what that does is it just keeps the process going, and it allows me to ignore everything else that's going on around me. I then know the person next to me fires. I then do their score. I then put a round in the chamber. No, I don't. I put it on the pad. On the bolt. Near the bolt, and then I lift the gun up. And so that whole thing it's an unconscious state. And if there's a delay, I just put my head down and I look at the grass. It used to be in focus. It's not anymore now. But I look at the grass, and I might even have a power nap. If there's a delay for message 1, for example. So it's not really an active thing. It's an unconscious thing. I remember when I was shooting the Queen's final in 2019, and I was at 1,000 yards, and I was doing very well. And I looked up and I looked at my ammo box, and all of a sudden I realised I only got 2 rounds to shoot. And Parag uses the analogy of driving a car. I looked down, I had 2 rounds to shoot, and all of a sudden I went, oh, shit, how did I get this far? And it was an unconscious thing. So that to me is how it works. It is like a flow state, I suppose. It's not how I describe it, but it's just an unconscious state of of a process that I just go through.
Did that wake you up? Did anything change for those? Did that kind of like?
Yeah, I seem to remember the end of my barrel moving a bit quicker, and my heart rate I think went up. And the target wouldn't stay still, but it was it was enough to sort of come draw back in and just back to basics, back to back to the process, and to keep it going. It turns out it works.
David, I know Glyn, for example, is a music listener before shoots, and you've spoken about the importance of stretching. Is there anything that you try and focus on before a shoot to ensure that you're in the period before probably 5 minutes to message 1, or even during the 5 minutes to try and optimize your mental state?
Is in that really short time, it tends to be more of a looking at the wind, trying to get a feel for what I'm gonna have to deal with. When a shoot is going to be really, really important to me, I will then try and introduce the music as well. And music, not to calm me down, music to pump me up and put me onto the front foot. Because the last thing I want to be is defensive. I want to be properly going for it and being free flowing. And again, that links back to the same side of things that Parag was talking about. Normally throughout a week, I'll be deliberately thinking about my few key fundamentals, and when it gets important, I will switch that off. Just let it happen. The thing we've not spoken about, or the other guys haven't spoken about yet, is it's hard to stay there for very long. If you stay in that, I'm just going to let it happen, it will fall off a cliff sooner or later, and you'll do something silly. So I will only stop thinking about it normally for a couple of days, and then I'll try and reintroduce a bit of just lightly thinking about the fundamentals again to make sure I don't fall off that edge.
It's interesting that you say about obviously preparing, about wanting to be offensive. I use that a lot in my own shooting. I have shoots that I call offensive, and then equally important are shoots where it's defensive, where for whatever reason I often find it's kind of linked to a bad firing point, and I just can't get a steady hold or a good position. And you think, look, I'm going to be happy to walk off this with a, forget a 50. I just want to make it as good as possible. So those kind of defensive shoots are just as important. Which kind of leads me on to my next question. Sorry, David, to put you on the spot again. What was all three of you have had enormous highs. David, you said that prior to Trentham in 2018, winning that crazy Queen's final in 2018, you'd achieved everything you wanted to in the sport. What was your lowest moment, though, as a rifle shooter or on a rifle range, and how did that affect you, and how did you kind of overcome it?
probably not really on a rifle range, my lowest moment as a shooter, and these two have got something to do with that. It's almost certainly not being selected for the Commonwealth Games, and obviously there's only 2 bases to go, and these guys were being brilliant, so I wasn't selected. But that was a real low point for me. The positives that came out of that, though, is it helped me detach myself partially from the kind of weight of expectation of others. It helped encourage me to go out and shoot because I want to shoot. I want to compete in these competitions. I want to go shooting. I want to do these tours. I want to be there with my friends. It helped me get more into that mindset rather than what everybody else is expecting of me. And I think that properly helped me step forward, because it's much easier to be in that positive, free-flowing space if you're doing it because you want to, rather than being more in a defensive place if you're trying to do it for other people.
Parag, what about you?
You know, when I was at university, we shot the Musketeers competition, and for most people, they'll think, well, what's that tiny little competition? Didn't really mean much. But it was a big deal to me. It was a big deal to University of London. And I was low man on one of those shoots. And I think I got a magpie and an outer or something ridiculous. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was an awful shoot. And I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. I was so embarrassed I'd let the team down.
And you'd already won the Canadian Grand at this point, presumably.
I had, yes. Although I didn't know really how I won the Canadian Grand because I was 18 and I was just going through the motions. So I have never forgotten that moment. I've never forgotten the moment of letting the team down that badly in what seemingly was probably quite a small competition to most, but it meant a huge amount to me, and I just didn't want to feel that way again. Didn't want to be in that position. So that's been my lowest moment, in honesty, and that's always stuck in my mind. I still remember it now.
Super interesting. Glyn?
So in 2018, 2 people went to the Commonwealth Games, and I didn't.
So similar to David.
Yeah, no, I'm jesting. That was expected. I mean, everybody shooting goes. You go through like it's almost like a sine wave. You go through peaks and troughs, and you have good times and bad times. You might be busy, you might be tired, you could be mentally absent or whatever it may be. But I vividly remember there are 2 occasions, essentially, when 2 occasions. One was in 2002. In fact, both of these occasions are Commonwealth Games. One was in 2002 at Bisley, shooting the Commonwealth Games. I was doing quite well in the individual until 900 yards. When I made a decision, I wound some stuff on my sights, I fired my gun, and it scored a magpie. It didn't take me long to realise that I'd wound the stuff on the wrong way. And that cost me a medal. So that was a relatively disappointing moment in my shooting career. But it was my mistake. You get on with it. And the second is slightly is in the 06 games, actually, and I'm not sure whether it's not necessarily a low moment. It's a disappointing moment, and I think Parag knows what I'm going to say. We were bloody hard, to win the pairs, and we won the pairs. And I'd been striving for that for a number of years, and I absolutely bombed in the individual. And for a variety of reasons, but the biggest reason for me was that I said mentally I was worn out. I'd done it, and I left. I was absent, and that was I think that's probably one of my lowest points, because it was a wasted opportunity. I felt to quote Parag, I felt like I'd let people down. I felt I'd let Jeremy down, let myself down, let Parag down. It's a bit of a cliche to say I'd let England down, but that to me was was a pretty low point. I mean, it was, you know, there was the silver edge to the cloud was obviously going back with the gold medal. You know, but nevertheless, it was an opportunity wasted, and you know, for me, that was probably one of my most disappointing times on the rifle range.
And actually, coming to that point, actually, Dan, sorry to interrupt you. I remember that vividly, and I remember thinking, how is it that I can help Glyn in this scenario? And we did everything together in the individual prior to each shoot that we were doing in the pairs, and nothing worked. You know, it was obvious that he had achieved what he wanted to achieve, and trying to get his refocus wasn't there. And it didn't matter what I did or what I could try to do to help him. It was an impossibility, I felt. So I could feel that in him. You know, it was pretty difficult.
Yeah, it was disappointing.
And so I guess that's where you spoke earlier about, you know, the importance of being able to get yourself back up for the, you know, for the Palmer, and, you know, having already had to, you know, deal with all the the excitement of the World Championships. So that's some good learnings, as the kids say these days. I'm gonna stay with you, Glyn. What's the, and you know, we're going to change tack and go in a different direction. What's the biggest mistake that you see people making, you know, on the point? You speak yourself about, you've got a very kind of ergonomic setup, and
Yeah.
I see that with you. You know, you always have your weather writer, you've got your trusty hat, your ammo box is always in the same place, you do your wind graph in the same way.
Right.
So what is, so you're very, very deliberate about things. Is there anything that you see kind of people doing that they shouldn't do, or that they could do better, or what's a common thing?
You know, there's no one thing, I don't think, but I think that, you know, certainly when you're starting out in the sport, you know, I'm a great believer that less is more. You know, and that goes for, you know, the paraphernalia you might have on the firing point. It goes for the movements that you might make on the firing point. You know, less time, you know, trying to fire quickly, whatever it may be. I think that sort of you could divide it into sort of different elements. If you look at the technical side of things, you know, people's position, you know, you sometimes you walk down the firing point and you do see some, you know, some very peculiar positions, and there's probably a bit of work, you know, that could be done on a variety of different people. So, you know, I think, I hope Reg Roberts would agree, but I noticed something with his position. I made a quick tweak for him, and you know, it made things better for him. And you know, it's just little things that I think can happen, you know, from a technical point of view. And certainly less is more. You know, there's just so much paraphernalia you can have on the firing point and on your gun. I think from a physical point of view, people, particularly, I mean, we're all guilty of this at a variety of stages of our shooting career. You know, you get up, you're tired, you've drunk too much the night before, you know, you eat at the wrong time, you eat the wrong stuff at lunchtime. So you eat at 1 o'clock to rush out and shoot at 2 o'clock. You know, your diet is dreadful. I think from a mental point of view, you know, I see people getting frustrated. I see people getting angry on the firing point. I see people, you know, getting het up about stuff that they can do nothing about, you know, and it's a complete waste of effort. It's a complete waste of time. You've got no control over that. Just look after what you can control and just crack on, you know, control the controllables for once. You know, it's a term I use in emergency medicine, and I use it in shooting. A lack of consistency, you know, people doing different things at different times, you know, for the same, they're firing 15 shots, but each of them is different. You know, consistency is key, you know, and, you know, whether that be stuff, you know, movement on the firing point, your process on the firing point, your process behind the firing point. One of the questions I asked with the Lions group when I used to mentor them was, what's your process? What do you do? You know, what do you do when you leave? You know, when do you start to prepare? When do you leave the clubhouse? What do you do when you get to the firing point? What do you do on the firing point? And very few of them are actually thought about it. And actually, what is it that they actually do? Excuse me. And I think that that's probably, for me, is where I start. You know, process. And, what's your routine? Work it out, figure it out, get it right, and stick to it. So there's no one thing, but certainly, what's your process is to me the thing that I wish I'd learned when I was younger.
Brilliant. Parag, what do you think, and trying to keep it as simple as possible, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think is, the one thing, if somebody came up to you and said, look, this isn't going great, and you said, oh, well, I haven't got time to look at everything, but do this. Is there one thing that every shooter could focus on that you think would improve their game?
Wow, that's again an impossible question, isn't it?
We can say everybody should eat better. Everybody should be fit. Everybody should whatever.
Yeah, I think it's squeeze and hold. Hold and squeeze. Sorry. So if your hold is good and you've got a really good grounding in your hold, and you squeeze the trigger correctly, yeah, when those two things are right, everything else just goes into place. And you've just got to get those two right. And it has to be consistently correct. And that's the thing. And focusing at 300 yards, because 300 yards or 300 meters, ball's tiny. You'll soon see if your group's not good enough. And you can extrapolate that out to the rest of the ranges. Of course, the wind then comes into contention. But yeah, for me, hold and squeeze.
And what does a proper squeeze look like? I mean, again, Glyn said about asking the Lions squad about their process, and I bet you a lot of people haven't thought about the way that they actually squeeze the trigger since they probably learned how to do it, and so they may have learned lots of bad habits along the way. But what does a proper trigger squeeze look like?
Well, I mean, hopefully I'll forget about what a proper squeeze looks like when I get to the World Championships, and I'll just let it happen. But ultimately, it's take up the first stage, and I just gently keep going. So there's very little delay. But once you've started that first stage and you keep going, there is nothing that stops that trigger from going, and you're doing it gently. And so you don't think about it at the second stage. You don't wait for the target to be perfectly aligned. If your hold is good enough and you squeeze through, you'll be fine.
David, I know you have your list of 5 things that you famously focus on. I probably can't remember all 5.
But
relax the front hand, big right hand, focus on the foresight, and the 2 others. I'm sure you can complete the list.
follow through. You said, because you're not sending them in the right order, I can't quite remember the last. Oh yeah, looking through the middle of the rear sight. I mentioned that one earlier. Really simple, but they're me things. They're me things that make me shoot well. That if you focus on those, that's not necessarily going to help you. The most important things for me, it massively overlaps with what Parag just said. But with the addition of, it's not about sight picture. So many people faff about trying to get this wonderful sight picture, and it's just not important. It's all about triggering. It's all about how you pull the trigger.
I was surprised when I spoke to Steve Negus last week. He said almost exactly the opposite, and that he was trying to, he was really focused on getting kind of a really good shot away. And I may be misremembering. And then he said, at one point when he realized that he had to, he'd held on for so long waiting for this perfect wind, this wind condition to come back. He had to get his last 10 shots off in whatever time. So he didn't have that opportunity. So he couldn't really focus on getting that sight picture, and the result was absolutely fine. So I think it's interesting how two people who both won at the top end of their sports can take a different approach, and it just goes to show, as you said, David, that what works for one person might not work for another person. But it's good to
on the sighting front. People shoot remarkably well when it's raining. They shoot remarkably well when it's foggy. You can't see a lot then. I think they shoot remarkably well because they focus on the right things rather than staring at trying to get this wonderful picture, which then starts interfering with some of the other things you do.
Yeah, I mean,
going back to Parag's, comment earlier on, you said your heart rate goes up 120. Nothing stays still at 120 beats a minute. And the end of the barrel's moving, the target's moving, and yet you're still scoring bullseyes. So the aim is the least important bit. Just to add to the above, it's hold and triggering are absolutely vital. Yeah, as the guys say. And yeah, you shoot the fog, you're aiming at a grey blur, and yet you're still, you probably have some of the best groups you ever have at 1,000 yards. At 2 p.m. in the corporation when it's been hoofing it down with rain.
Another thing that Steve said about one of his shots in New Zealand that it went off, and he doesn't even think that he had the target in the in the foresight at all. So it was still well in the black and almost a bull just at 12 o'clock. He said so. It just goes to show. Well, guys, thanks so much. That's been absolutely fascinating, and I know that we've got some questions from our beloved followers. I'm going to start with Ed Jeans, who says that the pathways that you've each trodden from youthful shooter to GB legend have similarities but also differences. What do you feel has been the important thing that you each have done yourselves that has made that difference between you and other people walking similar paths? Parag, is there anything that you think that you've done to people in a similar position that has resulted in the GB legend that you've done?
Taking a break, I think, is really important. I find that I get the best out of my performance when I'm really thirsty and desperate to get onto the ranges. Now, I mean, some of that is actually built into the weather that we have in the UK, so we tend to find that my shooting season will be quite short, just because it's so inclement in the off season. But that makes me hungry for more, and providing I've got my technical aspects right, I know I'll go onto the range, and as long as I get enough gun time, I'll start peaking at the right time. So I think I just know what it means for me and what I need to do. And it is different. It is very different. You'll hear David and Glyn both say different things. But I certainly need to put the gun down for long periods of the year just to get that mental urge.
Glyn, I've heard you described by numerous sources as an incredibly naturally talented shooter, and that you were always that from a very early age, starting out at Gresham's. Do you agree? Do you agree with that? And tying it to Ed's question, if so, did that kind of give you a natural advantage over people in your peer group, or have you done? Or if it's not true, then is there anything that you've done differently?
I've heard the same, and I don't know whether it's true or not. I mean, what has to be remembered is that I was given some incredible opportunities very, very early on in my career, shooting career, if you like. I did very well as an athlete, and I got given a break into. I got a GB cap the following year, and I shot Palmer 2 years later. And Andrew Tucker gave because I'd done well at Grand Nines when I was an athlete, and so I was very fortunate to be given some breaks early in my shooting career, which surround people older than myself, experienced than myself, and I could literally osmose information and techniques and stuff. So I suspect that a lot of my naturalness, if you like, actually is because I was given some incredible opportunities very young. I spent, most of the 1990s touring. I think the thing that I have done, which I think has helped me, certainly in the last 20 years, probably, is my mental approach, and it is my ability to maintain a sort of internal calmness, if you like, and mental preparation and mental ability on the firing point. I think that's the one thing that I have done that hasn't been sort of gifted to me, if you like, or it wasn't an opportunity. So I think something I've done change my mental approach or mature my mental approach is probably perhaps a better way of putting it.
David, Emma Nuttall asks, if you could go back in time to when you were just starting out, what advice would you give to yourself?
I really like that question because it's potentially got so many different answers to it. So what I mentioned earlier about the weight of expectation and trying to separate yourself out from that, shoot for yourself, shoot because you enjoy it, shoot because you want to be there. If I gave myself that information setting out, I probably wouldn't have shot much. I would have probably just dipped in and out and I'd never be where I am now. So I think the bit of information that would have been useful, again, is the answer to my previous question. I obsessed with sight picture, just like everyone else did for quite a few years. If I was given that information up front and given really good quality coaching on triggering and how to trigger, I think that would have made a bigger difference with getting me there quicker.
Interesting. Parag, anything from you?
Well, when I was an athlete, I won the Canadian Grand Aggregate, and I didn't know how I did it. But what I can tell you is, the year before I left school, one of my closest friends had a subarachnoid hemorrhage and died. We were in boarding school. I said goodnight to him. Ironically, the Saturday night, we had dinner together with a bunch of other friends, went to school on the Sunday. I said goodnight to him. Literally 10 minutes later, I heard an ambulance and he died. He was a shooter, didn't do much shooting, but I remember going to Canada and after every shot, it was like, this one's for Warren. Come on, Warren. And that his name, the performance was irrelevant. It was just, I was doing it for Warren. And I didn't really appreciate why my performance was so good. And I wasn't interested in winning the Canadian Grand Aggregate. I was just dedicating it to him. And I did win it. And it took me a long time to work out the powers of the mind. So I think having that lesson early was really important to my performances over the years, because, you know, once I've got the technical aspects right, I know with the right mindset and a true belief in winning, or a true belief in perfect performance, then the winning will come. So
that's really interesting.
It's a difficult one. But
Yeah.
Even now, I still say every now and again, if I'm not happy with a shot, oh, come on, Warren, we can do better than that, to myself. And this is many years down the line.
Super interesting. Glyn, you said you were afforded, you know, some very, very fortunate opportunities when you were a young buck. Any advice you'd give to younger Glyn, knowing what you know now?
I honestly don't know. Actually, I don't think I quite appreciated how important the sort of the external bits of one's life can affect your performance, and I think that I would probably, I don't know, I mean, this may not necessarily answer the question, but I think I've always found that the stuff that's going on outside of your shooting, you know, and will affect how you perform. And certainly when I shot very well in the sort of the early 90s, where I was in med school. But then when I started to work, my shooting, you know, wasn't so good. I had a young family, et cetera, and I probably didn't appreciate at the time perhaps why I wasn't shooting quite so well. And then I went overseas, you know, for 5 years, and I was fitter. I was, you know, mentally more present. I had less to worry about in terms of my family, because they were on holiday at the same time we were at Bisley. And actually, you know, they were some of my best performances. I wouldn't necessarily winning stuff, but certainly some of my best performances. So I think if I was to go back and speak to my younger self, I would say, listen, don't underestimate how much this is going to affect, your ability to perform. Don't underestimate, don't be surprised when this happens. Don't worry about it. It'll come back, and things will, and you'll be able to do it over again. Or make sure everything outside of shooting is dealt with and sorted. And you'll find that your performance will be better. So I think it's really sort of having an understanding of what was to come, and not to worry about it too much. But yeah, the external factors, I think I perhaps underestimated how much that would affect my ability to perform.
Brilliant. David, Charles Dickinson states that the differentiator in competitions is who reads the wind best, and asks, do you have any tips for lesser mortals? So, one, do you necessarily agree that all things, I suppose other things being equal, that it is he who reads the wind best, that ultimately will triumph? And are there any particular tips that you can give lesser mortals, as Charles says?
Clearly wind's very important, but the better you shoot, the more margin for error you get to get your wind wrong. So that is still fundamentally up there, is in I want to shoot as tightly as I possibly can. Depending on where you are, depending on the wind conditions, where we're going, South Africa, it's likely to be really, really agile. So I'm going to be trying to get my shots away quickly before that wind changes. The other thing that immediately comes to mind about wind reading is something Arthur Clarke told me 20 odd years ago. You can look down your range, and you can break the wind into brackets. You've got your weak end, you've got your little bit less than the middle, a little bit more than the middle, and your strong end. And he said you can look at it as there are 4 winds. Stick a value on each of those, and if you follow that, you're not going to go particularly far wrong. So it's a fairly simple tool, but it's surprising how often you can apply it, and it works very well. Fairly manual approach to pass on. I guess it's not something that I'll necessarily be trying to use in competition. I'll be trying to free flow where I just chuck a number at it. But yeah, I find it a really useful tool, especially if I was struggling with wind somewhere.
Parag, would you agree with that?
Certainly, I do break up the range into different distances for sure, because I think that's really valuable as a tool, just to try and work out what's going on. Because obviously it's different at 300 compared to 600, and certainly the longer you get, the further you get back. I think in addition to this, for me, it's a bit like pattern recognition. So I'm good at that, I think, and less good at calling the wind just off the spot. And so, if I and I will do a wind chart, I always do. If I get a handle on what the flags are looking like and it's 6 or whatever, I'll wait for my opportunity for it to look similar to fire the next shot. Yeah, obviously there are constraints around that if you're shooting 2 or 3 to a target, but it does work in you don't actually have to move your sight so much in quite a lot of the shoots if you just wait.
I was surprised at something that Chris Watson told me a few years ago. I realised that obviously Bisley not being my home range and not getting there very often, I was doing far too much of, the wind's dropped, so let's wind off quite a lot and shoot on 1. And it's picked up, let's wind on quite a bit and shoot on 3 or whatever. And Chris said, well, really, even at 600 yards, I didn't really move more than a half, because if I shot the whole thing on 2, then as long as I'm shooting relatively tight, I should get them all anyway. And so from 2, he would go to 1.5, or from 2 to 2.5. So my bracket was this big, and his bracket was that big, because he was doing, taking that approach where there are maybe 3 winds, but you don't need to move your sights as much. Glyn, do you think is that something that you do as well?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of take I take a bit of both of what David and Parag, so I try and make sure that my shots are as good as they can be, because you've then got 2 minutes to play with. You've got a minute either side. I don't think I'm a particularly good wind reader. I find it difficult to, certainly at the beginning of the meeting, for example, I look at a set of flags and go, I haven't got a clue what that is, so I get the chart out, okay, well, it's here's what it could be, here's what it could be. It's somewhere in the middle, right, crack on, I'll put 3 on the sites and see what happens. And then, I use a graph, so you can average it out, but at the same time I would take a similar approach to what Chris does. If you can shoot a half-minute group and you've got a 2-minute bullseye, you can afford to get the wind wrong. I'm shooting for, I know points win prizes. Perhaps these days V-balls win prizes, but it's probably why I don't win individual competitions, but I win aggregates because, I don't score high V-ball counts, but I score bullseyes. Because I'll take a 5 over a 4 and getting it wrong. So yeah, I'll take a mean, and I'll shoot through it if I can. But at the same time, I go, well, that's clearly got up. How much has it got up by? Well, I'm shooting at 600 yards, a half a minute. Oh no, better put a minute on. 1,000 yards. Never dealing quarters at 1,000 yards. They don't exist. If you see a change, it's going to be at least a half or a minute. So it's the other thing I think about Bisley flags as well. You were talking about putting on a minute and putting on to take it off a minute. I think there's a sort of a particular sort of strength of wind at which the flags lift, and I think they're down and it doesn't change and it doesn't change and it doesn't change. And all of a sudden you get a weight of wind and the flags lift. And I think what we tend to do is we overestimate the drop and we overestimate the pickup because it's because the flags just have this particular quirk. Something I think is happens. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. Somebody who's a better judge of wind, can probably comment. But yeah, so shoot tight, take an average, knock around the ball.
An interesting theory. I'm conscious of the time, guys. So I'm just going to one final question, and it's from your captain. So if I don't ask it, you guys will be in trouble. So Jeremy asks, how excited are you all about the next few weeks? And given that you've all done it so many times before, perhaps not in your case, Glyn, this will be your first Palmer since 2003, as you said. What spurs you on?
I haven't done it for 20 years.
There we go.
I haven't done it with Jeremy. No, that sounds awful. I haven't done it for Jeremy. I'm excited to get back in the saddle.
Yeah, and Parag, you said earlier that you probably already answered that by saying that you don't do much in the off season. So by the time that the season rolls around, it's probably a little bit early for you. You're kind of chomping at the bit.
I'm desperate to get out there, definitely, and I love shooting in South Africa. Right. And the South Africans are going to be very stiff competition. More than anything, as well, is that Palmer Trophy. We want to get that back off the Australians. They had a phenomenal performance last time round, and that makes it even more exciting to try and prize it back off them and not let it go into the hands of the South Africans. So yeah, very, very keen and excited.
And David?
I'm more excited than ever, to be honest. I mentioned earlier about going flat before the last Palmer. It started to come back during that Palmer, but then we had the break for the pandemic. Didn't touch a rifle for over a year, and when I started again, it became so clear to me how much I like the sport. It's not just the competition. I like the sport. I love being with the people. I love doing it, and to be honest, ever since then, I've been properly excited about going shooting.
Brilliant. Well, look, guys, thanks so much for agreeing to do this and taking the time. I'm incredibly excited as well, and I'm not even taking my rifle with me. I'm just taking a recording device and a microphone. And yeah, I think it's going to be the closest Palmer for a very, very long time, and I can't wait. And I wish you guys all the very best. So thanks so much, and I will see you down there.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.